conversation with us, and thank you to the CPS for organising it. Airbus, a proud contributor to UK growth and innovation. 12,000 people across the UK, across aerospace, defence, space and security, all across the UK. Good levelling up story. We do fantastic wing building for all of our aircraft out of North Wales in Broughton. We build our satellites, the brains behind our satellites, in Stevenage and in Portsmouth. And in Filton near Bristol, we are doing some groundbreaking research that's going to feed into our commitment by 2035 to have a hydrogen-fueled aircraft as a key contribution to net zero. A business that's very proudly British. A lot of R&D that we do here, 250 million in 19. A lot this year, particularly in partnership with government. All of that driven by fantastic skills and innovation that's driven out of the UK. At the moment, we have 600 apprentices, many of them at our site in Broughton, and some of the most impressive people that you can meet. So it's great that we're here to have this opportunity to speak with you, Minister, around growth, around the future, around innovation, around strategic advantage, around partnership with other countries across the globe. Thank you for your time, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and thank you for supporting this conversation. I mean, we will get on to growth and innovation and cooperating with other countries, but I do have to ask you first. It's been quite a week, if I can put it like that. I mean, do you, when the Prime Minister sort of called you in and said, I'd like you to take this job, do you look back and think, what an idiot I was to say yes?
Well, as long as it's me thinking I'm the idiot rather than her thinking she made a mistake, that's the main thing. It was about 4 weeks ago to the day that I got called into Downing Street and offered the position as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. It may only be 4 weeks. It feels like 4 decades. So much has happened since then in one way or another. But look, it has been an extraordinary couple of weeks. There has been, to use an aeronautical analogy, there has been some turbulence in the sky. But I hope, but there are no need for life rafts, don't worry. And I hope now that some of the challenges, some of the markets have settled down now, and some of the political controversy around the 45p tax band has been very decisively addressed. I hope we are now into clearer skies and we can get on with talking about the growth plan, what it means for British businesses, who are very enthusiastic, by the way, about what this growth plan means for their companies and what they can do. We can articulate it to businesses, to the public, in a way that the sort of noise in the last couple of weeks has precluded us from doing. And we can get on with just delivering it, because when this plan delivers higher growth for our country, I think public opinion will respond very favourably to that. So I'm hoping the turbulence of the last couple of weeks will be a mere, soon-to-be-forgotten blip in an otherwise serene journey to our destination.
Yeah, let's not torture this metaphor too much, because
I've probably milked it as much as I can. Yeah.
But on that note, I mean, there's obvious. I've just noticed the patriotic socks.
Of course, absolutely. Whenever I wear this in the Commons, the SNP always comment unfavourably on my Union Jack socks, which of course only encourages me to wear them more often.
But obviously, I mean, there's a tension here, isn't there, between businesses do like tax cuts, they do like investment incentives, they do like a pro-growth government, but they also like certainty and calm. And we did a project on investment in Britain where we spoke to more than 100 major investors. And one of the things that someone said to us on that was the UK used to be the most stable environment for investment and business, and due to a whole range of factors over the last few years, it's become it's started to feel less stable. I mean, is there a tension in terms of businesses taking up the wonderful incentives in the growth plan if they're worried about uncertainty, if they're worried about the prospect of a Labour government, if the UK still doesn't feel like it's flying steadily, to return to our metaphors?
Well, look, I don't really accept that characterisation. I think when businesses come to make long-term investment decisions, they don't look particularly at kind of week-to-week or month-to-month political noise of the kind we've seen in recent days or indeed recent hours. I think what companies look at is a nation's sort of long-term strength. And the United Kingdom is very lucky to have extraordinary strengths in that regard. We're sort of widely regarded around the entire world for things like our business culture, the rule of law, the strength of our various institutions, the dynamism of our workforce, the English language. We've got so many fundamental things going for us. We also have, of course, a government that is now unashamedly pro-business, unashamedly pro-growth. So I think those existing long-term fundamental attractions are garnished and enhanced by the approach that we're taking. And despite the events of the last few years, a couple of general elections and everything else that have happened, changes of Prime Minister, I think Liz is now the fourth Prime Minister under whom I've served during 7 years in Parliament. Despite all that, we've seen phenomenal business investment in the United Kingdom. To take an example, in the first 6 months of this year, UK tech businesses, I used to be tech minister, I'm not claiming personal credit for this, by the way, but it's a good figure.
Go on.
In the entirely down to in the first 6 months of this year, UK tech businesses raised £12.5 billion of venture capital finance. That's £500 million a week. It is more than any other country in the world, apart from the United States. We beat China. We got more VC into tech than China. It was 3 times the level of Germany. It was double France, a fact that I'm sure has President Macron choking on his croissant as we speak. So the fact that we've got such incredible levels of investment in our tech industry in that example shows how, I think, robust and attractive our country is. And the plan that the PM and Chancellor laid out, the growth plan, will only serve to increase that even further.
Sure. So your role as Chief Secretary of Treasury, it's one of the most important in government. It's also one of those that people outside government don't really know about. And similarly, you yourself are a sort of relatively new figure on the stage. This is your first cabinet job. So for those who don't know you, like to quote David Cameron, what is it that pumps you up? What is it that gets you going in the morning? Why are you doing this job? Why are you in Parliament in the first place? And why are you on the blue side of the aisle?
Well, what gets me up most immediately is normally my 9-year-old daughter pulling off the duvet. But in terms of politics, I set up and ran businesses for 15 years before entering Parliament. I floated one of them on the stock market. And what I would like to do is just help unleash the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit that the British people and the British nation has. Because I think we have enormous potential to do even more than we're doing at the moment. And if we do that, if it's successful in accomplishing that defining mission, then not only will it yield a successful economy, our fellow citizens will have better jobs. They'll end up themselves enriching and improving their lives. Public services will be sustainably funded. So particularly entrepreneurship is something I'm very, very, very passionate about. Having set up and run businesses myself, before I came to Parliament, I set up a charity called Next Big Thing, which helped inner city kids get into entrepreneurship. It's something I've been interested in for a very long time. But I'm also interested in bringing the sort of discipline that an entrepreneur or a business leader has into the way public services are run. And one of the things that sort of triggered me, this is going back about probably, because I ran for Parliament first in 2010, and first became a councillor in 2006. Around about just before that, my dad went to hospital for a heart operation and contracted MRSA, almost died, at a time when huge amounts of money was being pumped into the health service. And I thought to myself, well, these things are not being run as well as they could be, and I wanted to try and bring some of that sort of business experience into the way the public sector gets run. And as Chief Secretary, of course, you control essentially public spending and where money gets spent, and that creates an opportunity to make sure that it's being spent wisely. And I think, needless to say, it's fair to say that even in the first 3 or 4 weeks, it's become apparent to me that money is not always being wisely spent.
Well, we will get onto that very shortly. I want to ask one more question on your ascent to stardom, which is that obviously the key stepping stone, arguably, in
members of the audience, I think, question the premise of, wonder about the premise of that question. But
the key stepping stone, arguably, in your rise to the cabinet came, of course, when you wrote a report for the Centre for Policy Studies as a then anonymous, relatively anonymous backbencher. And in fact, it was one of the first things I worked on taking over the thing. And I remember even then being impressed by the energy you put into it, the dynamism that you showed then. And of course, your the project report was called Homes for Everyone, which I think was a great title. And it argued that we need to build a lot more houses. Is that something that you're still committed to? And obviously your experience as an MP in Croydon and how things have changed since writing that report, as the situation's only got, the need for more housing has only got more intense.
Yeah, it has got more intense. It's one of the things holding back our economy. I think I feel particularly strongly for younger people in their 20s and 30s struggling to get on the housing ladder. I believe very strongly in home ownership. I believe in home ownership because it ensures that the fruits of economic growth are widely spread. It ensures that people feel they have a stake in society. I think it's extremely important that we promote and encourage home ownership. And 86% of people aspire to own their own home, and yet only about 65% of our fellow citizens do so. So 20%, 1 in 5 of our fellow citizens would like to own their own home, but in fact do not. So enabling that 20% of our fellow citizens to realise their dream, I think, is critically important. So clearly part of there are some measures we can do around the tax system. So I was very keen on the stamp duty measures announced in the growth plan 11 or so days ago, and are in force already. The way stamp duty is in force already. So if you're a first-time buyer, you will now pay no stamp duty whatsoever on the first, I think it's £425,000 of the value of your first-time buyer purchase. And for anyone buying a home, the first £250,000 are completely free of stamp duty. So that's, I think, a key tax intervention in the housing market. On the supply side, we definitely need to get Britain building more. It needs to happen, of course, in the right places, because people are kind of rightly conscious that the environment they live in is very important, and blitzing things like suburbs. I represent a largely suburban seat, and sort of destroying the character of suburban areas and covering it in unsightly blocks of flats is not the way to do it. But I think there are ways you can achieve it. For example, in town centres, including actually Croydon Town Centre, building very high, 40, 50 stories, I think works. And in many areas of central London, that works and other cities, probably including Birmingham, that works very, very well. I think new towns can play an enormous role. Where, there's, for example, a lot of building going on around Ebbsfleet near HS1 station, and you find relatively little opposition in those areas because there aren't many existing settlements in the area. So there is a lot we can do, I think, to turbocharge appropriate development, but also make it much faster. I was talking last night to the chief executive of a big house building company, and she was just telling me that there are sites where they've got planning permission, they've gone through the local process, the local residents have agreed, or local council speaking for residents have agreed, and there's all kinds of legal challenges and bureaucracy that means a project that should take 1 or 2 years to get into the ground, in fact takes 5 or 6 years to get into the ground. And the infrastructure bill we're going to be bringing forward aims to not lower standards, but aims to speed up, to expedite the process for things like house building and critical road and rail projects. It takes us sometimes 7 to 9 years to build a new major road. In competitor economies like China, right, they'd build the whole thing in 7 to 9 months, let alone 7 to 9 years. And if we're going to compete globally against emerging economies like China and India, and indeed Vietnam, whose ambassador was here earlier, or indeed more established competing economies like South Korea and Japan, we need to be agile, we need to be quick, we need to be energetic, and we need to get on with things, and that is what this government will do.
And quick, energetic, and getting on with things does seem to be your brand. You said that obviously your job as CST is spending. I mean that's the bulk of it. And sorry for the slightly cruel question. Can you just confirm for us that the medium-term fiscal plan will be on November the 23rd? Because there's been a bit of a confusion about that.
Well, I don't think the Chancellor, I think, said yesterday his intention is to bring that forward on November the 23rd, and I think the Chancellor's comments on this are the ones that you should refer to. But I'm glad you mentioned the medium-term fiscal plan, because we believe in responsibility as well as just cutting taxes to encourage business. And his plan will set out how we're going to get debt over GDP falling in the medium term. And we should bear in mind, of course, that we're starting from a position of strength, because already we have the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. So we're starting from a good position, but we're going to make sure we manage our finances responsibly over that time period.
But you said there are already some areas you can see where we're not spending as well as we could, or as efficiently as we could. Are you able to go into any detail on which in particular?
So I don't think this is the right moment to publicly point fingers at ministerial colleagues who, of course, are getting their own feet under the table.
But that's Simon Clarke. Come on.
No, Simon. No, Simon was my predecessor, of course, and is a fantastic Secretary of State.
Simon is a lovely person and a fantastic Secretary of State. I should.
Absolutely. No, Simon's fantastic. But look, I mean, we're going through a process now in the next few months of looking for efficiency and cost savings to make sure we stick with iron discipline to our existing spending plans and not spend any more than those, and make sure we're prioritising expenditure on frontline public services, which the public would expect, and also on projects which will increase growth, because our defining mission is growth, as the Chancellor set out.
But obviously inflation makes that a lot harder. I mean, you've got the prospect potentially of pensions going up 10%, benefits maybe going up by 10%, maybe not. You've got the sort of the real terms value of public sector spending on things like the NHS is falling. How do you square that circle?
Well, I think first of all it's important to note that the inflation that the public sector, you're getting into some quite technical questions already, the inflation that the public sector experiences is not the same as the inflation that the general public and the general economy experiences. I mean, CPI, the clue's in the title, Consumer Price Index. The inflation that the government experiences, government service experiences, is currently running at around about half that level. So the inflationary pressures on public spending are not as high as you would imagine sort of off the cuff. Secondly, even with the higher than expected public sector inflation, across the 3-year spending review period, we're now in the first of those 3 years, when we're going to stick to the spending targets, there is a small real terms increase in public spending across that period. It's only a small real terms increase, but it is a real terms increase nonetheless. So I don't think it's as difficult as some people may suggest. On the other choices that you referred to, then those decisions are going to get taken in the coming weeks. I think some of my cabinet colleagues have been commenting on those quite enough. We're going to go through the normal process.
Come on, join the club.
No, I'm not going to throw fuel on the fire. The decisions haven't been taken is the key thing. There's a normal process we go through each autumn with DWP play an important role in, and we're going to take those decisions in the coming weeks as usual. And I don't think there should be any sort of speculation before then.
Fair enough. Looking at the longer term issues of growth and the growth plan, and I swear I was going to ask about this, irrespective of the identity of our wonderful sponsor tonight. You're someone who's talked about like science. You were previously the Minister for Technology. Like Britain, how do you make Britain a more high productivity, high quality country in terms of the work we do? How do you move us up the value chain in things like manufacturing, exporting, and all the rest of it?
Well, I mean, you've very kindly given me the answer in your question, which is very unusual for an interviewer. So, I mean, science and technology is really at the heart of unlocking our productive potential. So, over the last 7 years, digital and tech businesses, or the digital and tech economy, has grown 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. Wages in the digital and tech sector are, on average, 40% higher than in the non-digital economy. So growing that bit of our economy is critical to our economic future. Now, we're doing pretty well already. I mentioned the VC investment figures where we're beating China, beating France comfortably, and beating Germany by even further. But last year, let me give you some more examples. Last year, 2021, there were 29 new British unicorns, companies that have gone from a startup to $1 billion valuation. That's a new unicorn every 12 days. We've got more unicorns than France, Germany, and Israel put together, and globally we're third, behind only the US and China. So we're going to double down on this. We're going to go even further. So you'll have seen in the growth, well, you may not have seen in the growth plan because it was lost amongst all the noise. We're doing things like massively increasing the SEIS limits, the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, which are really generous tax breaks, personal tax breaks, to invest in early stage growing companies. We're going to remove,
as recommended by a certain brilliant think tank.
Absolutely, we are where the CPS suggest we follow. We're minded to remove the April 2025 sunset on EIS and VCT schemes. Was that a recommendation as well?
I think we just generally said they're all very good. Please protect them from the Treasury.
There we are. The Treasury is now. So as a technology minister, I was calling for all of this, and frankly, didn't get very far. And now I'm in the Treasury. I've managed to do it within the first 4 weeks. So we're removing those sunsets. Most excitingly of all, one of the gaps we identified in the UK tech ecosystem was a lack of scale-up funding. So by that I mean 100, 200 million pound funding rounds, kind of Series C plus, pre-IPO rounds, to grow, really scale businesses up before an IPO. What I was seeing was that only too often UK companies weren't doing that. They were selling out too early in their growth cycle, often to US either funds or US larger trade buyers. So we were missing out on that massive sort of leg up of growth and scale they would otherwise develop. And of course, they would then end up listing on the NASDAQ rather than the London Stock Exchange. So the gap we wanted to fill was that funding gap. And there was another announcement in the growth plan, again, that basically nobody noticed because it got lost in the noise. We're going to establish a new LIFTS fund, long-term investment fund for technology and science. We're going to put £500 million of government money in it, but we're then going to use that to raise money from UK pension funds, which have about £2 trillion under management, life insurance funds with long-dated money, and sovereign wealth funds from around the world to get that up to about 5 billion, and that will invest in long-term science and tech projects, semiconductors, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, all of the life sciences, as well. That has its own fund already, to really build our tech economy. So those things together and a bunch more ideas that I have not yet been able to implement, but we'll be trying to do so shortly, will give our sector a boost. And that is going to put a shot of adrenaline in the arm of the UK economy, and it'll not only will it help us meet that 2.5% growth rate, but if we can get science and tech delivering, we can beat it.
Pretty inspiring stuff. But with the UK, I mean, one of our problems as an economy is we've got this amazing, like we are kind of have a sort of split personality. We have some amazingly high productive things, some amazing industries, and a long tail. And we also have lot more people who can't read and write very well than other countries. You know, we have a huge number of job vacancies. We don't have many skills. I mean, what's the solution? Is it upskilling the UK workforce? Is it, as the Prime Minister seems to have suggested, opening the doors again on immigration? I mean, what's the how do we sort of bring along the rest of the country along with the tech companies?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you referred to the so-called fat tail. I think Andy Haldane, when he was chief economist of the Bank of England, referred to the so-called fat tail of low productivity companies. So diffusing technology across the whole economy is critical. The artificial intelligence strategy, for example, seeks to do that with AI, get companies of all kinds using and adopting AI. The Help to Grow scheme actually is designed to help companies adopt lower level technology as well. On the skills question, it's a bit of both. When it comes to like highly skilled jobs, we do want to encourage internationally mobile people. I stress with very high skill levels to come here. I'm sure Airbus would want to do that. So there are things like the high potential individual scheme, where if you've got a degree from a top 100 university anywhere in the world, then you can just come here, regardless of whether you've got a job offer or not. The scale-up visa is designed to make it very easy for fast-growing companies to bring highly skilled people into the country very quickly and very easily as well. But I stress that applies to higher skilled jobs. We do need to invest domestically also. That's why we've got local digital skills partnerships, helping local businesses and local outlets building skills locally. I would personally, I'm a physics graduate, I would like to see I did a physics undergraduate and I did a master's specialising in theoretical quantum mechanics. I'd like to see more STEM subjects at university. That's obviously a DFE policy, but it's something I'll be trying to encourage in government. So I think it's a question of both making it easy for the most talented people in the world to come here, whether that's in science, tech, finance, aeronautical engineering, whatever it may be, in addition to building our domestic skills pipeline as well.
See, this is why I think we should all hope that you follow many of your predecessors in becoming Chancellor, because having watched the nation's journalists try to struggle with Kwasi Kwarteng's doctoral thesis on the recoinage crisis of 1608 or 9 or whenever it was, the thought of Fleet Street and the lobby trying to puzzle their way through a master's thesis on quantum dynamics, I think would be sort of But I mean, that is something interesting I wanted to talk about. Which is that one of the problems with British government, both on the elected side and the non-elected side, is the number of people with a scientific background, an engineering background, a technology background is vanishingly and frighteningly small. I mean, we have my favourite thing on this is there is a parliamentary APPG on classic cars. There is not a parliamentary APPG on self-driving cars. If you talk to people in the cabinet office, the guys who deal with AI have a very easy life, because the guys who work on bees sitting next to them get endless emails from MPs saying, "Oi, oi, 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 what about we don't seem to take this stuff as seriously as we could. I mean, do you feel like a rarity in someone who has that kind of background, and what can we do? And has the civil service and your parliamentary colleagues as well have they had the is there the expertise there that we need in this new age?
Well, I think I would certainly welcome more people with science backgrounds and technology backgrounds coming into Parliament. I would very strongly encourage, if anyone here has got a science and technology background, run for Parliament straight away. I would very strongly encourage that.
Unless you're a Labour supporter, obviously.
Yeah, as a Conservative, obviously. Anyone with a science degree will, of course, be able to analyse economics and the situation and rapidly conclude that there is only one party to run for. You mentioned AI and autonomous vehicles. I mean, actually, as a good example of how vibrant our sector is, there's a fantastic spin-out from Cambridge University called WAVE, W-A-Y-V-E, now based in King's Cross, that is using artificial intelligence to power autonomous vehicles. So the AI system basically drives the autonomous vehicle, and it doesn't have to have the route pre-programmed, or the sort of physical geography, or what a traffic light looks like pre-programmed, because it learns it. It learns it. They have a safety driver, and they learn from the safety driver's interventions, and eventually it learns it so well you don't need a safety driver. And they just raised £200 million just a few months ago. So that's an example of an amazing British business doing fantastic things that will have ultimately, I think, global applicability.
One point that keeps being made largely to me on Twitter is, you're so keen on going for growth. Why not, rebuild ties with Europe? I mean, obviously, Airbus is our sponsor. They're a European company. How do you see Brexit playing into the growth agenda? Is it a case of more divergence and faster divergence, or a case of trying to smooth out trade links and rebuild ties?
Well, and the first lesson is don't look at Twitter in a political context. As I've not looked at Twitter all week. I think I would probably have gone nuts if I'd done that. I dread to think what my timeline is full of this week. As David Cameron said, the United Kingdom is not the same as Twitter. With all due respect to the wonderful guys.
Too many tweets make a
something. Yeah, I don't remember what he said. But on your question about Europe, look, we've left the European Union. We're pursuing an independent trade policy. We're pursuing an independent regulatory policy, which creates opportunities for us to alleviate burdens from the back of British business. We're going to hear a lot about that in the coming weeks. Things like MiFID, Solvency II in the city, and other things as well. On the trade point, we've done, I think, 70 or 80 free trade deals around the world, some of which are either better than the EU equivalents or are new. But look, we want to continue trading with the EU. We've got the TCA, the Trading Cooperation Agreement, to facilitate that. So, I don't see it as a sort of false choice between Europe or the rest of the world. We're going to have close relationships with European countries, both politically and economically. Partnerships like Airbus demonstrate the importance, I think, of cooperating in that way. But I think, and we can do that outside the European Union, just in the same way that European Union member states trade closely and cooperate with the USA and Canada and Japan and many other countries. We will do the same, but we can do it in a more nimble and a more agile way.
One more question before we throw it over to our audience, which is, you're doing all these fantastic things. You hope and believe that they will lead to growth. I mean, I think many of them I hope will, because they're the kind of things we would believe in too. What sort of timeline do you think this takes effect on, and is it going to be quick enough for voters to notice, given where the polls are?
Well, I'm certainly not going to make any predictions.
So that's Chris Philp guaranteeing 2.5% growth next year.
That is not exactly what I said. I think as the record will show. This, by the way, is why we have Hansard in Parliament recording every word you say. So I'm not going to make any predictions. But I do think that, or I'm confident that the measures we took in the growth plan, or announced in the growth plan a week or two ago, will lead to much, much higher levels of growth. That'll lead to higher wages. It'll lead to better jobs being created. It'll create a sustainable tax base to fund public services. And I think in terms of the interaction with the electoral cycle, assuming the election is approximately 2 years away, I do think that will come. The public will see the results of this plan on that kind of time frame. And look, I think the market up and down, or down and up, and the political noise we've seen a little bit this week, I think that will be a long forgotten memory when it comes around to the next election. And what the public will rightly judge us on when it comes to the next election, assuming it's in 2024 sometime, about 2 years, roughly 2 years from now perhaps, is the results we've delivered. Are wages going up? Are more jobs being created? Is the country growing? Are we funding our public services? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then I think we will deserve to get re-elected. I think results will speak louder than words.
Delivery, as someone said fairly recently.
Indeed.
Cool. Well, let's open it up to questions. We have a microphone. We have people with hands up. This is exactly what we want. Let's start with Alice, and then home team advantage. Sorry.
Thanks. I'm Alice, Deputy Editor of CapEx, and I want to ask you. So you're a London MP, one of very few that are left. I just want
very few Conservative.
Very
to
few
the left.
Conservative, sorry, yes.
We haven't had suddenly handed the, Airbus haven't called in their mates to wipe London from the map.
One of the few Conservative MPs left in London. Obviously, there's no way we're going to get the kind of growth we want to without London, the biggest engine of economic prosperity in the country. What do you think about the levelling up agenda? That felt to me like it was not necessarily a particularly pro-London agenda. And do you think now that we're sort of pivoting back to growth, we might see more of a focus on London? And how can we get more MPs, more Conservative MPs, winning in the capital?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we're not. So the new government is not in any way resiling from the levelling up agenda. We're still committed to the levelling up agenda, and we're supporting that with, as you'll see, with various things like infrastructure projects, road and rail, skills programs, and of course investment zones, which are designed to help some of those communities prosper. But those investment zones, of course, apply in London as well. In a sense, the original investment zone, the most successful ever investment zone, was Canary Wharf, which in the late 1980s onwards transformed a sort of post-apocalyptic wasteland into Europe's financial capital city, and it did so with additionality. It didn't sort of destroy or replace the City of London, the square mile, the traditional square mile. It was additional to it. And London will have, I hope, some investment zones as well. I know that Mayor of Croydon, Jason Perry, the newly elected executive mayor, is talking to DLUC about that for Croydon. I'm sure other London boroughs are as well. I think the financial package of deregulation, appropriate deregulation, that the Chancellor hinted at in the growth plan, and which he's going to be expanding on in some detail. He describes it internally as Big Bang 2, will have a huge impact on financial services, meaning explosive growth rather than just an explosion. That's going to have a hugely positive impact on financial services, but obviously it'll have particular resonance in the City of London as well. The measures on allowing tourists to reclaim VAT when they go back, when they finish their holiday, I think will particularly have a benefit anywhere in the country that has a big tourist economy, including Edinburgh, Belfast, but it'll really help obviously Oxford Street, Regent Street, Knightsbridge and all that kind of stuff, as well as other tourist areas around the country. So I think London can be very pleased about this growth plan, but it is a growth plan for the whole United Kingdom, and levelling up remains very important.
Excellent. The gentleman here.
Thank you. Bob Hughes, I'm a Surrey County Councillor. And just as a preamble, can I say, as a former research minister, I absolutely agree with you about the importance of breeding top scientists. And I hope that in your reviews of expenditure, you won't be seeking to cut the PhD budget, because predecessors of yours have tried to. Just saying that. Anyway, in terms of a rather more mundane subject, but central to you as Chief Secretary, the cap on care costs. Surrey is perfectly capable, has a good track record of being able to control its expenditure very well. But if cap on care costs went through as it is envisaged now, it would cost us over £100 million, because over 60% of people in Surrey using adult care are self-funders. I just hope that's something that's on your agenda to review, because it could be a big reverse for the party in Surrey.
Yeah, well, look, thank you for the point. I mean, on the question about PhDs and R&D expenditure more generally, I think it would be a terrible false economy to cut spending in that area, which I definitely do not intend to do. PhD students are obviously the lifeblood of our research community. We've committed, actually, as a government, to increase government R&D expenditure, which is mainly channeled through UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, that funds university research and development. We've committed to increase that from 15 billion a year up to 20 billion a year, and then beyond that, we intend to get that matched with, or not more than matched, with private sector R&D investment to get up to that target of 2.4% of GDP spent on R&D. And the new Lifts Fund, I think, can help do that. On the question of social care more widely, look, happy to talk to you about the issues being faced in Surrey. I'm very mindful of the pressures on local government finance more generally. I'm mindful of the pressures being experienced in social care, which of course is why the Health and Social Care Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, Therese Coffey, announced that package specifically for this winter just a week or two ago. I think it had £500 million of money directed to help ease those pressures this winter, and we will no doubt be discussing how to help social care pressures further in the future, and just very happy to always be listening to local authority colleagues. I met actually with the chair of London Councils only this afternoon, and we discussed similar issues. So, very happy to just have a dialogue about social care in the broadest sense and the challenges that you face.
Can I just ask quickly on a similar theme about sort of eating the seed corn? I mean, capital spending. There's a classic pattern whenever the government faces a cash crunch, it's capital spending which suffers. It's an obvious area if you find yourself needing cash, but equally there's an element of sort of eating the seed corn there if we do cut it. What's your sort of view on that?
Well, I'm very wary of cutting investment in our long-term future, because we need to make sure we are laying the foundations today for the prosperity of our children and our grandchildren, and many forms of capital expenditure do that. We need to make sure that we're prioritising in the right way, as I touched on a few minutes ago, making sure the projects that we're funding are the right projects, the projects that will deliver growth, that are really valuable. So that's a sort of a prioritisation exercise we're going through. Very often capital projects underspend, so we agree a capital budget, and then it turns out that whatever it is we're funding takes a lot longer than expected, and there's then an underspend which just sort of comes back to the Treasury, and that's a missed opportunity. So we need to look at that very carefully as well. So we're running the microscope or the slide rule over all of this, but I think I don't want to mortgage our future by chopping away investment that we need for our children.
I see our sponsor wants to ask a question, and given she's paying for the drinks, she gets to do so.
Thank you. That's quite an expensive question then, isn't it? Thank you, Minister. It's really interesting to hear over the last few days a lot on services, great on tech and some of the stuff that you set out there. Really support that. I think a company like Airbus would also think of it itself as a tech company. A lot on financial services. A little bit on how Treasury now sees the balance with manufacturing, of course, as you'd expect from me. And then also in manufacturing and green growth, there's some clear choices that we need to make over the next few years that actually are about infrastructure, that are about investments. We're thinking about sustainable aviation fuels, or we're thinking about in longer term sort of hydrogen fueled. Some of that might require a bit of a think about contract for difference in the same way that we kind of thought about it for offshore wind. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about some of those sort of green, perhaps a bit more manufacturing focused questions for the future?
Yeah, I mean, so clearly manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, is something we're very keen to support. There's obviously the MADE initiative that has been running for a little bit of time. So it is an area that we're keen to support, as you would expect. On this sort of question about, I guess ultimately the bigger question is what you're sort of alluding to is the transition to net zero, and we are committed to that. We want to make sure it happens in a way that is financially viable and doesn't impose excessive costs unduly quickly. So we want to be thoughtful and measured about how that transition gets made, and to make sure the financing of that is affordable and is proportionate and is sensible, recognising that it needs to be made and recognising that opportunities can flow from it, and that by developing domestic capabilities in some of these areas, the hydrogen fueled planes is a huge opportunity for the future, because that could become a massive source of export opportunity for decades, indeed possibly even centuries ahead. So that is quite a sort of delicate set of balances to strike. We're mindful of the opportunities, clear about the ultimate destination, but wanting to be just thoughtful and proportionate about the costs. So I think my colleague Chris Skidmore is doing a rapid piece of work on the net zero plan and how these trade-offs get made and how these decisions get taken. So I definitely encourage engagement with that process. But I hope the sort of direction of travel is clear. The willingness to invest is certainly there. We want to do it in a way that doesn't in the sort of crush consumers in the very short term. And I think there is a path that balances those objectives carefully.
Thank you. A couple of people over here. You go to that gentleman and then the one.
This was also like a very good speech, and that's my name is Benny. I'm from the Wandsworth and Wimbledon, Young Conservatives, and I just wanted to ask how was your role, and how does the growth plan should we say foster like supply chain resiliency, especially in like critical resources like rare earth metals or like semiconductors, because especially now, because the way I see things is that nowadays that's how we live in a world that's like increasingly, should we say, protectionist and And should we say that that's like emphasizes a lot on like industrial policy, on certain like critical like resources. Like for example, the US, they have the CHIPS Act, or even the EU, they got their own like semiconductor like industrial policy. So yeah, that was just my question.
Great, and it's a great question. So, I mean, partly we need to foster relationships with trade relationships and political relationships, economic relationships with countries that have some of these critical components like rare earth materials and critical componentry that we need to make sure we've got a diverse and reliable supply base. But as we've seen with the semiconductor shortage you referred to, and indeed as we've seen with energy, in a crunch situation that may occur once every 10 years or once every 20 years, those relationships are not always reliable. That's why in the energy sphere, we're working very, very hard to become electricity independent as quickly as possible, doing things like expediting nuclear programs, including obviously Hinkley Point's under construction, expediting Sizewell C, expediting small modular reactor programs. Jacob is giving out these 100 oil and gas licenses to drill in the North Sea on an expedited basis. So all of those things are designed to bolster domestic supply and domestic resilience. I think semiconductors is a particularly important area. It's important for supply chain reasons. It's also geopolitically important when you consider the fact that I think something like 80% of semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan, and there are obvious geopolitical threats, if I can euphemistically put it that way, when it comes to Taiwan. So globally diversifying supply is important. Now, whether we want to sort of drop sort of tens of billions of pounds on subsidising, leading edge fabs, silicon fabs at like 2 to 3 nanometers, which is sort of, very expensive. Only two companies in the world can do that, TSMC and I think Samsung. That is a question. Other jurisdictions are doing it. You've mentioned the US and the EU. South Korea are doing it as well, and so Japan. But there are areas, and we are, by the way, the government, I was working on a semiconductor strategy when I moved on from being technology minister, and my successor is now picking that up, and I'm discussing it now from a Treasury point of view. So a UK semiconductor strategy is under active development. I think that's been publicly flagged already. I think that is likely to focus on the areas, on bolstering and boosting the areas where we have domestic strength, which are particularly design and IP, where companies like ARM and Graphcore in Bristol have world-leading capabilities, and also in emerging semiconductor technologies, particularly compound semiconductors, which are growing rapidly and are going to end up being at least 30% of the market, and they're in a whole range of different applications where we have a genuine lead on IP. There's a compound semiconductor cluster in South Wales, for example. So really investing heavily in compound, so we can sort of leapfrog into the next generation of semiconductor technology, I think would be probably the smartest thing for us to do. But I think you're going to hear more about that in the DCMS semiconductor strategy before too long.
Well, gentleman there, and then
Thank you. Julian Ellicott, Chairman of the South West Region. Thank you, Chris. It's great to see a minister who's very passionate and has got a good grasp of the detail and what you're talking about. It's great to hear that the deregulation package will include Solvency II. As an insurance professional who's been working on Solvency II for 15 years, it's great to have seen its moment in the sun over the summer. It's a really, really tough piece of European legislation that has bound the insurance industry in so many ways, not just restricting the investments that our insurers can make, but all sorts of pettifogging rules that have stifled innovation. But is there a recognition in the strategy that it's not just the rules on the paper that matter, it's how they're imposed, and it's the culture of the regulators that has caused, I would say, just as much problem as the written regulations? And if so, how does the government propose to tackle that aspect?
Yeah, thank you. So this is obviously the area of responsibility that the new City Minister, Andrew Griffiths, is focusing on. Andrew, as you probably know, is a former CFO of Sky. Very
chair of the CPS's Advisory Council.
Well, credentials come no higher than that, obviously. Andrew is doing work on this, and I definitely encourage you to talk to him. Clearly, our regulators are independent, and we don't want to interfere in their day-to-day operations. But we do want to make sure that as they consider regulatory matters, they are mindful of growth as well. So that is something I'm sure Andrew is working on. I think more broadly, the opportunities presented by reform of Solvency II and indeed MiFID and other regulations give us an opportunity to really unlock the investment potential of our insurance industry. We're making some changes to the pension fee charge cap as well that will do similar things over there. And if we can get our insurance firms and pension funds, who collectively manage trillions of pounds of assets, to invest more in growth businesses, in growth strategies, in science and tech, but other things as well, that will have an unbelievably dynamising effect on our economy. To give you an example, I think proportionately, US pension funds invest 10 times more in VC than we do. Something like 68% of capital inflows to US venture capital funds, 68% come from US pension firms. The figure here is only 12%. I know that's pension, not insurance, but it's a similar principle. And if we can get this capital better allocated, not only will it generate higher returns for pension funds and insurance companies, it will also have a dynamising effect on our economy. So there is a really significant opportunity we can unlock.
Hi, Chris. John Ashmore, I'm the editor of CapEx. Bit of a basic but a classic question. How do you deal with the tension between your kind of thrusting planning and infrastructure agenda and the fact that there isn't a Tory MP in the land who hasn't launched a doughty local campaign against housing and infrastructure in their area?
Well, I tried to answer that in response to Robert's question about the Homes for Everyone paper that you had the foresight to publish a few years ago. Look, I think there is a way of getting development done that does not provoke pitchfork-wielding locals to sort of lynch the local council. And I think, obviously, building high in city centres is one way of doing that. Expediting brownfield development is another. I think new towns and new villages tend to provoke much less opposition, providing they come with appropriate infrastructure, than Greenbelt or suburban intensification do. I think I made the point earlier to Robert about speed of process. Limiting the ability to JR certain decisions, particularly for larger projects, I think will help. Giving local planning authorities more resources, so they've got more planning officers just to take decisions more quickly. And it sort of doesn't, that's not speaking to what the decision is, just getting it taken faster. Developers would happily pay more to get faster decisions without prejudice to what that decision may be.
In fact, in many cases, they are literally funding all of that themselves because the resourcing is so bad.
Yeah, precisely, exactly. So again, I was discussing this with a local authority leader this afternoon, and encouraged the wider use of PPAs, planning performance agreements, where for larger developments, the developer sits down with the council and says the developer will pay a bunch of money, quite a lot of money, in order to resource up consideration of their application. Doesn't guarantee the result, of course, that's taken independently, but at least it gets it done faster and with proper resources. And I was suggesting they might apply that approach to a wider range of developments, because most developers I've ever met would happily pay up for faster decisions.
Then the lady here there.
Hi, thank you. I think the mission for growth is the right one, and I'm just bringing it back to the home for a moment, and energy and the cost of living crisis. I wondered whether you think you might start to use VAT and cuts in VAT on certain aspects, for example, home installation, to try and reduce the use of energy, because although we've capped energy prices, people are still very frightened across many homes up and down the whole country about just the overall cost and what they can do. So I do hope that in your thinking you will start to use VAT more regarding where you want that expenditure to go to help those energy bills, and actually will increase growth, bring jobs and growth.
Yeah, well, I know that the new Base Secretary will be keen to promote home insulation projects. I'm happy to look at whatever proposals he may come up with. Obviously, we do have to be mindful of fiscal impacts. We have to be, as I said earlier, financially responsible. So we have to, I can't sort of make off-the-cuff promises around that. But I'm glad you mentioned the energy intervention, because again, that got lost in all the noise. I mean, just 4 or 5 weeks ago, people were genuinely fearful that their bills might go to £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000, even £7,000 a year. And through the energy price guarantee, this government has taken decisive action to stop that happening. And we're kind of cap energy or guarantee energy bills on average won't go higher than £2,500. That is a huge intervention. it does come with costs, although I would add the costs are extraordinarily volatile depending on the future price of gas, which is one reason when we did the costings in the energy plan, in the growth plan, we only published the costings for the first 6 months up to March of next year. What I can say is that just in the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks, the move in the forward gas curve, the forward gas price curve, has meant the estimated cost of the scheme has come down by a third compared to what it was originally. So the more we can do to ease forward gas prices and improve supply, the more affordable, obviously, that the scheme becomes.
The gentleman at the front here who's had his hand up for a bit. Getting your steps in, John. Sorry.
Hi there, Jay Asher from Airbus also. Thank you, Chief Secretary. I just wondered, as someone who's been a former businessman and as a minister who's engaged with the Treasury, if there are any particular ways that you think the Treasury is sort of very good at engaging with wider government and business, and if there are any things that in your new role you might seek to change.
I guess I haven't really been in this post long enough to kind of form a view about that. I mean, I would say that my door is very open to speaking to businesses. I've met, just at this conference, a large number of businesses, big and small, in the last 48, 72 hours. I'm very keen to keep doing that. In fact, one of the things about this job being a minister I like the most is the opportunity to meet businesses, hear their ideas. And as technology minister, I spend a lot of time meeting tech businesses up and down the UK. So I hope our door will be very open. And the Prime Minister has an advisor on business relations who I know is going to do a fantastic job. So, and I know the Chancellor as well spends a lot of time. When he was Base Secretary previously, he spent a lot of time meeting with and engaging with businesses. So I think our door will be open. Feel free to walk through it whenever you want.
I want to ask actually on a similar note, what's it like having been in other departments, what's it like being in the Treasury? And have you found evidence of this so-called Treasury mindset that is all the rage?
Ooh. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to tell tales out of school. And I would say the Treasury officials are very high calibre. They do great work. I've got huge respect for them. The Treasury is a very sort of powerful department. I did feel some frustrations in other departments I worked in at one's ability to get things done, and the Treasury is the source of a great deal of the levers to get things done in government. So I've sort of enjoyed now being on that side of the fence. And it's the fourth department I've worked in.
Now you can kick sand in your colleagues' faces.
I'm not sure. I'm definitely not going to be kicking sand in anyone's face, but I'm definitely going to be making sure that we prioritise growth. And having done three other departments, this is the fourth. I'm very glad to have landed here. I started off my parliamentary career as a member of as a backbencher on the Treasury Select Committee when Andrew Tyree chaired it. I always wanted to be a minister in this department, and I'm really pleased to have landed here. To use an aeronautical analogy again.
Hello, Chris. Very glad to see that you've got technological background. I'm an engineer myself. Entirely agree that engineering technology is going to drive growth. How many people actually in the government or in the party are in fact got technological backgrounds?
I have no idea. Not very many, I think, is the answer. Of course, Margaret Thatcher famously was a chemist. Angela Merkel in Germany was a physicist. But
I think Therese Coffey. I think I'm right in saying that.
That's right. She's got a PhD in chemistry. Therese has, I think. So I think Kemi. That's right. Kemi Badenoch is an engineer. I think an engineer by background. So there are a few, but it's not very large numbers.
Not enough. And then.
Thank you. Are you concerned at all that the public now may perceive that interest rates are directly affected to what the government does? And if interest rates continue to rise, as they do globally, that perhaps unfairly the Conservatives could have that blame put on their door when it's just a natural move away from cheap money?
Yes, that is absolutely a risk. We've seen in the last 6 to 9 months a global upcycle in interest rates. Around the world, they've been going up. They've been going up actually by more in the United States than they have here, which probably partly explains dollar strength against a whole range of currencies, not just sterling, but the yen and the euro as well. there is a danger that if that global upcycle continues for a period of time, may not be very long, but for a period of time, there is a danger that our political opponents seek to wrongly and unfairly blame the government for having been in some way responsible for that. So we're going to, I think, just have to articulate very clearly that this is part of a broader international cycle affecting many other countries as well. Of course, base rates in America are materially higher than base rates here. Those are facts we're going to have to just sort of point out on a fairly frequent basis. So I'm extremely mindful of that risk, and we're just going to have to combat it with very sort of clear communications.
But on a similar note, obviously, the higher interest rates go, the higher borrowing costs for the government becomes. I mean, how much pressure is that putting on your on spending? And how much of a concern is that for you? Because obviously, for Rishi Sunak, God rest his soul, that was
He's still alive.
No, I don't know, but that was just like a huge issue for him, which the new government seems less concerned about.
I wouldn't say that. Look, we're concerned about any pressure on public spending. Of course, the higher rates obviously don't affect the outstanding existing stock of government debt, although higher inflation does affect the index-linked component of that. It's more of an effect on new issuance, which is only a relatively small proportion of the total outstanding debt stock, but it's an issue we're mindful of and monitoring closely.
Fair enough. And one last question, and then we will wrap up.
Thank you. So earlier today we had a fantastic CPS panel on road pricing, and your colleague Hugh Merriman was here and talking about the proposal that the Transport Select Committee put out earlier this year. And one of the big questions is, what is the incoming government's sort of perspective on replacements for fuel duty and vehicle excise duty for electric vehicles? I know the Treasury is a issue.
Yes, oddly, the Treasury is very interested in the prospect of one of their major streams of tax revenue completely disappearing, and is trying to think of what might come next.
Well, I haven't got any policy to announce. As George Osborne used to say, I'll take that as a submission for a future budget.
Fair enough. So thank you so much to Chris for joining up. In your own words, you've certainly had a dynamising effect on the audience and hopefully on the government. Please join me in thanking Airbus for supporting us and thanking Chris Philp.